Hello, everybody. It's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by the legendary director Peter Hyams, who directed films such as Capricorn One, Outland, The Star Chamber, 2010, Narrow Margin, Timecop, Sudden Death, End of Days, and many more. It is my great pleasure to welcome Mr. Peter Hyams.
Thank you. I'm not sure about the legendary part, but thank you.
And Peter, at first I would like to know if it was always clear in your head that you wanted to become an artist, that you wanted to be involved in the film industry no matter what, or if you also had a backup plan of some sort in case it didn't work out.
One of my favorite lines from literature is from Joseph Heller in Catch-22. The only problem with Nately's plan is that Nately's plan didn't work. I had no plan. My family comes from the theater. My grandfather comes from the theater. I was an art student from the time I was mobile. And then I was studying music. And I became, like many art students, fixated on photography. And I kind of had a classical education in photography. I wrote some fairly obnoxious poetry when I was in school. So I wanted to write and I wanted to paint and I wanted music. And I come from a politicized family. And to me, the amalgam of current events and American politics and world politics and imagery and sound was documentary film. So I started as a gopher at CBS News. I had the joy of working for Fred W. Friendly, who was the president of the news department and nothing less than a legend. And I've worked in various capacities at CBS for 7 years and got to the point where I wanted to take a photograph that was artful rather than the photograph that was accurate. Where I wanted to write things that would get a response rather than things that were factual. So I left CBS and decided that I wanted to make regular movies. The difference between great documentary directors like Don Pennebaker and people like that is the ability, the talent to capture an event. The charter for a film director is to create the event and make it happen. And that's what I wanted to do. And had I known the odds when I was doing it, I probably wouldn't have done it. So I was blessed with being stupid and blithe. And I wrote, and it became a movie. So that's what I just wound up doing it.
You directed your first film in 1974, and you've directed so many pictures. You've worked with so many great talents, actors such as Gene Hackman, Harrison Ford, Arnold Schwarzenegger. What is the essence of filmmaking to you?
It's storytelling in a way where people can see something that's also fascinating looking. I like directors who tell the story rather than call attention to themselves. So the Steven Spielbergs and the Ridley Scotts and I could name 20 more, Alfonso Cuarón. Those are the great filmmakers to me.
Right. Thank you, Peter. And if I'm not mistaken, and please correct me if I'm wrong, your first script was T.R. Baskin. They didn't want you to direct, so I think Herbert Roth directed it. Please walk me through the process of finding a buyer, a potential buyer for the script, and how difficult that was to get the film off the ground, even though you didn't get the chance to be the filmmaker, the director.
Again, I was blithe. I was an idiot. I didn't understand how risky it was. I wrote the script. I sent it to Paramount. Paramount said, yes, we'll make it. president of Paramount said, "I have good news and bad news for you." When I went to meet, he said, we want the script, we want to make the film. Um, you can't produce or direct it." And I said, "Well, I have good news and bad news for you. I have good news is I'm thrilled you like it, and bad news is I'm going to go someplace else." And they said, "Okay, you can produce it, you can't direct it." So Paramount wanted it immediately, and then my job was to get a director, and I sent it to a few people, and sent it to Herbert Ross because the Paramount said they'd make it with Herbert Ross, and Herbert said, yeah, he wanted to do it.
Great. And then 3 years later, you actually did get the chance to direct your first picture. It was produced by Robert Chartoff, Irvin Winkler. It was called Bustin'. So, how did you get the first gig as a director? How did that opportunity come about?
When I started, studios had all given some young denim shirt wearing director a movie to make, and they had each succeeded in making an unreleasable movie. So I realized that in order for me to do it, I would have to, at that time, television was considered like a vat of sulfuric acid. If you stuck your foot in it, you'd pull out a stump. So feature people didn't go to make television movies. And I figured my chance was to write and direct a television movie. And the man who was in charge of television movies for ABC was Barry Diller, who became one of the great executives of the history of the movies. I sat down with Barry and I said, they were 12-day shoots, these movies. They were movies of the week. And I said, you hire a whole bunch of, at that time, men, and you hire them because you know the bottom line, they're going to get it done in 12 days. I'll write a movie for you, except you have to let me direct it. You don't know the bottom line with me, except you also don't know the top line for me. I may actually be good. And I had years of documentary filmmaking experience, and I knew all kinds of big words like sprocket and frame. So Barry said, what do you want to do? What are your ideas? I said, I have two ideas. I'd like to make a film about an attempt by the United States government to fake a space shot. And he said, what else do you want to make? I said, well, I love Raymond Chandler. I'm a Raymond Chandler freak. And I'd like to do a period detective movie about a detective and a dwarf. He said, do that one. So I wrote that, and we cast Richard Boone, who at that time was a big television guy, and Michael Dunn, who was a brilliantly talented little guy. And I made the film. Nobody is accurately rated in this business. Everybody is either over or underrated. And this television movie, which was called Goodnight, My Love, I'm embarrassed to say the Hollywood Reporter called it the Citizen Kane of television movies. Trust me, it wasn't the Citizen Kane of anything. However, it was enormously well received. And Irwin Winkler, being the wonderful, smart producer that he was, came to a screening of it, corralled me and said, direct a movie for us. And I said, sure. And they said, we made a very successful movie at Columbia called New Centurions. And it was about the LAPD. Said, we'd like to do a kind of, not really a sequel to it, except we'd like to make a movie about vice cops. And so I said, I'll do that. And you have to let me direct. They said, yes, you can. And they made a deal. And I spent a year, because I really was a kind of not very good reporter. I spent a year doing research, and I spent a year with cops and pimps and hookers and everybody all across the country, and sat down and wrote this screenplay, and we made it.
The 70s was a very interesting decade in filmmaking, not only because of great movies, but because of the talent that emerged. the great directors, I mean, you being one of them, Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, William Friedkin, Ridley Scott, and so many more. So it was a fabulous decade. And how would you describe the filmmaking scene of the early 70s and what went on there and the whole style and the politics and how quote unquote easy it was to make a film as versus today?
I think people tend to forget that movies with Roman numerals after them are sequels and sequels to sequels and sequels way predated the 2000s. I mean, they made what, 7 Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers movies. How many Andy Hardy movies did they make? In the 70s, made Airplane 1, 2, 3. I don't know how many Airplane movies, how many Superman movies, how many Star Wars movies. However, there were also people like John Calley and Alan Ladd Jr. and later Sherry Lansing, who loved movies. They did love movies. I think now movie studios are run by very big corporations. Movie companies are not their biggest asset. They don't particularly like movies. They're like an automobile company that thinks a car is a very shaky way to get around, except if somebody very famous will drive in one, they'll make one. If they could confine everything to the Marvel universe, they'd be very happy because they can go to their board and the board's very happy. There are also, I don't know if there are the talents around like Steven Spielberg, like Francis Coppola, like Billy Friedkin, like Ridley Scott. However, Spielberg is still making movies. Ridley Scott is still making movies. Alfonso Cuarón is making movies. So I think there are fabulous movies being made, and there's an enormous amount of boring crap that's being made. Except I have a feeling you could go. We cherry pick movies from certain times. So my guess is there are just as many bad movies made in the 70s and just as many bad movies made in the 80s as there are now.
I come from a different generation of moviegoers as opposed to the kids of today. So I relish and worship a different type of movie than many people of today's audience. So I attach a great deal of importance to storytelling, to atmosphere, character development, and so on and so forth, because I want to be intrigued by a story as opposed to just watching a $500 million spectacle which predominantly relies on special effects and neglects the story, if that makes sense.
And there are people who will watch the $500 million special effects movie on their telephone. Look, when I was a kid, because I'm that much older than you, we went to the movies. That changed so that in the 70s and 80s, people didn't go to the movies, they went to a specific movie. We went to the movies every Saturday. Didn't matter, we'd see a double feature, and the operable phrase when I was a kid was, "This is where I came in," because you'd go to the second feature during it, and then you'd see the main feature, and then the second feature would come back on again, and you'd get to the spot where you came in, and you go, that's where I came in, and you'd leave the theater. That changed. So now people go to a specific movie, and that changed in the 70s. And again, I think the Spielbergs of the world and the Lucases of the world helped change it. I mean, I read the Peter Briskin book about how somehow or other Spielberg and Lucas ruined everything by making the blockbuster movie. I think, with all due respect, I think Peter Briskin was just wrong. I think Steven Spielberg is the Amadeus of making movies. I think he's just one of those rare people who just got it. He just got it. He got it as a kid. There was a time when Stephen and I were friends, which was an amazingly exciting time for me. He did a television series called Amazing Stories, and I did one of them for him. You would sit with Stephen, and he would just casually throw out ideas, and you'd want a sieve to kind of catch them, because they were absolutely amazing. Um, I don't know if there are amazing talents, young talents. There may be. Ben Stiller to me is terrific, except absolutely terrific. I can't think of I can't think of movies that I've seen lately that knock me out the way some of the things that are made for cable television. I think that's some of the best filmmaking going around. You watch Succession, which is like phenomenal writing and phenomenal acting, and this camera crap of shaking a camera and kind of half zooming and half out, which is to do nothing except call attention to the person who's directing that thing. And you go, camera shaking, camera shaking is not reality. Camera shaking is Parkinson's. We don't see things shaking. We actually have a steady cam in our head. When we run, the world doesn't shake. Otherwise, everybody would throw up. Um, I believe in storytellers. That's why people I mention are storytellers. And when you have Ridley Scott, you have an artist who makes every frame beautiful. Uh, and when you think of movies that you really love, or at least that I really love, when I think of The Godfather, it's not just I'm going to make an offer he can't refuse, leave the gun, take the cannoli. It's also this kind of amber, exciting set of images that Gordon Willis and Francis Coppola put on the screen. Uh, there's a book called Adventures in the Screen Trade that William Goldman wrote, and William Goldman was nothing less than the greatest. And he just, his most quotable line is "Nobody knows anything." There are some extremely gifted people around. I'm not sure that the seventh X-Men or the seventh Guardians of the Galaxy is necessarily the work of unbelievably gifted guys. But when you see, look, I made what, 3 or 4 films that took place in outer space, and then I saw Gravity that Cuarón did. It was just mind-boggling. I love seeing something that I go, well, gee, if I made it, it wouldn't be as good. It's a thrill to see that. The earliest, like, most extraordinary experience I ever had in a movie when I was a kid was Lawrence of Arabia. To sit in a movie theater as a kid and see that, somehow or other the screen just went bigger. I remember sitting in the theater when I saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I had never experienced that in a movie theater. I think they're master storytellers. I think that's what they are. I think they're masterful storytellers. And you come away with the story, which just thrills you when it's made like that. You talk about Billy Friedkin. There isn't a film director in the world who hasn't made a cop movie of some kind. Billy Friedkin made the best cop movie ever made. When you see The French Connection, there's never been a better cop movie. Alfonso Cuarón made the greatest science fiction movie ever made, and Ridley Scott and Alien. Those are the things that I love.
When I hear the term blockbuster, it's always a double-edged sword to me, because it not only implies a money-making movie or a high-grossing movie, but also the size and the scope of a film. So I think, I would consider a film such as E.T. a blockbuster, because I think it's great.
Absolutely.
It's a blockbuster. Jurassic Park. I would also call Schindler's List a blockbuster.
I saw Schindler's List in a movie theater. The film was over and the credits rolled and nobody spoke. And then the film ended and the lights came on and everybody got up and walked out of the theater and nobody talked. It's the most amazing experience I think I've ever had. Um, when something grabs you like that. You know, the first Star Wars was just nothing short of brilliant. Indiana Jones is phenomenal. E.T., my God, and Close Encounters. Steven Spielberg makes extraordinary films because he's Amadeus. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
he just gets it. I actually think I'm probably wrong, except I actually think it 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 is so simple for him in terms of how to do it. He sees it so clearly that he kind of ties one hand behind his back. He did part of Jurassic Park from his apartment. He'll do two films in a row. He does, I think, to make it difficult for him, because he's just that talented.
And I think Jaws is one of his all-time
Oh,
greatest films. One of the best films ever made.
people didn't take baths after that. Uh, Again, I was in a hot movie theater, and to hear an audience scream, the whole audience scream, um, was just. I remember when you talk about Billy Friedkin. Went to see The Exorcist when it opened, and it was at the National Theater in Westwood, and lines around the block, packed. Walked in, and there were two girls. There's a staircase that goes up to the auditorium. One girl is crying and had vomited, and she was being consoled by her friend who had her arms around her. So you had to walk past these weeping girls and some vomit to go up into the auditorium, which smelled of vomit. And the theater gets filled, and everybody looked at everybody else the way you do if you've ever been on a roller coaster before it starts. They're all kind of giggling and because they know they're in for something. And the theater lights went down, screen goes black, and at that time the logo for Warner Brothers was a red W that just came like that. The audience screamed at the Warner Brothers logo. They were so scared. That's the magic of a movie. The magic of a movie is to get 400 to 1,000 people reacting at the same time,
Yeah.
whether it's laughter or whether it's tears or whether it's suspense or whether it's absolute fear. Um, that's the magic of a movie because it's such a collective experience.
Yeah. And again, The Exorcist by Billy Friedkin, one of the best movies in that genre. And
The best.
yeah, if not the best, yeah.
And I was born Jewish. I came out of that movie. I was a Catholic. Uh, just I, it's just great filmmaking. But Billy Friedkin told a story, and he told the story with such fidelity to the story. He didn't do anything that was wasted. He didn't do anything that was pretentious. He told the story. That's why he's one of the great filmmakers.
Speaking of great 70s filmmaking, in 1978, Capricorn One was released, which I think is one of your finest films. As I understand, Peter, and correct me if I'm wrong, nobody wanted to make this film. And why was that? Because of the subject matter? Because of the fake Mars mission? Why was it a quote unquote hot potato for some?
Well, first place, unless you're Spielberg or Ridley Scott, most people's careers are kind of like the thing in the hospital that measures your heart rate. It goes up and down, up and down, and up and down. So I was down. Nobody wanted me. Um, I wrote the script. So it was the combination of the screenplay and me. As I said to somebody, the reaction was not, it's kind of interesting if you change the end. that wasn't the reaction. The reaction was, could you get your car out of the parking lot? And it was like, no. So I had made a couple of movies in a row that thudded. Nobody wanted me. I wrote the script. Nobody wanted it. I needed money. MGM hired me to write and direct a film called Telephone. I wrote the screenplay. They loved the screenplay. And as it turns out, they never had any intention of having me direct. So as soon as the screenplay was finished, they said, you're not going to direct it. We're going to have Richard Lester direct it. Richard Lester's an American who lived in England, who directed a little ditty called A Hard Day's Night. A lovely man, and he had me make changes, and I was just in such a trough making changes. And then he didn't want to do it, and then Don Siegel, they wanted Don Siegel, and I met with Don Siegel, and he had me do some changes. Then I just said, I can't do this anymore. And right at the bottom, when it's becoming a Charlie Bronson movie with Don Siegel directing it, this guy that I knew and liked, Paul Lazarus, a very bright guy, said, whatever happened to that script? And I said, nothing. He said, if I can put it together, can I produce it? I said, of course. He got in touch with Lord Lou Grade, and Lou Grade wanted to finance it. So I made it. I made it under the radar. It was for Warner Brothers through Lou Grade, and it happened because of a fluke. It was a success because of an even bigger fluke. Warner Brothers was not thrilled with the output of Lou Grade. I was in England shooting a film, and the head of marketing called me and said, how does it feel to be one of the luckiest people in the world? I said, what do you mean? He said, Dick Donner cannot deliver Superman for the summer. So Warner Brothers is without a summer movie. And we had preview after previews. I mean, smash, phenomenal previews all across the country. He said, so you are now the summer picture for Warner Brothers. You're getting all the theaters and you're getting the advertising. I said, well, what would have happened if Dick Donner had delivered Superman for Christmas and for summer? He said, you would have opened in 2 theaters in Atlanta. So they were prepared to dump the film.
How did this film change your life and your career, and also how you were perceived within the community of other filmmakers?
When you make a movie that's a hit, you are perceived as a good filmmaker. When you make a movie that's a flop, you're perceived as not a good filmmaker. That's the criteria. And you know, there was a very smart agent named Tony Fantozzi, who was at William Morris, who once said, the song don't go, there's no art like show art, there's no art, I know. The song goes, there's no business like show business, there's no business, I know. And you know, you are asking for other people's money. It's not, you haven't gone out and bought a number 3 soft pencil and done a sketch. You're asking for millions of dollars of other people's money. So they have a right to expect more money coming back. It did change me in one respect. I am not the biggest fan of my work, because it's who I am. It's never good enough, and I only see what's wrong. I don't see what's right. It's why I've never seen a movie I've made after I'm finished, because I can't make it better, and it's just too painful. So when I would get a bad review, I would say, these guys are really smart. It just kind of enforces my feelings about myself. And then a critic asked to have an audience with me. Not, you want to have lunch? or a cup of coffee. He wanted an audience with me. I said, sure. It's rather papal. And he told me that he was so excited to be with one of the 10 young masters of American cinema. And I kept on turning around looking to see who was sitting behind me because he couldn't have been talking about me. And the proof of my mastery was this film, Capricorn One. And the litmus test, the thing about it that made me one of the masters of American cinema, was the Kubrick homage in the movie. If you have integrity, you say, I'm sorry, sir, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. There's no Kubrick homage. Not being burdened with that kind of integrity, I spent 40 minutes trying to find out what this guy was talking about. And towards, guys are running across the desert and getting knocked off, and one guy makes it and finds an abandoned garage, and he's got to make a phone call. It's not cell phones. He opens up the cash registers. There's nothing there. So he takes a crowbar and he opens up the Coke machine. Well, as any film buff can tell you, in Dr. Strangelove, there's a scene where a Coca-Cola machine is opened with a crowbar, and I think Keenan Wynn says, you're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola company. That was the Kubrick homage. That's why I'm talented. So when you read things that are complimentary about your work, and the reasons for the compliments are so silly, that you kind of think, well, I'm certainly not as good as this guy said. Maybe I'm not as bad as those other people said. So it's somewhere in the middle. And I became somebody who just really went, all right, the good ones are just as silly as the bad ones. So that's how it changed me.
Okay. And Peter, you just said that you basically can't watch your own work and you don't want to. So I take it you never wanted to go back in time to, let's say, release a certain film as a director's cut, or to remove some things which you perceived as a glitch or a blemish?
Joel Cohen, who's another phenomenal and original talent, released a director's cut of Blood Simple. And he had an interview in which he said the director's cuts are normally opportunities for directors to put back in a film what rightfully was taken out of the film. His director's cut of Blood Simple is shorter than the release. He said, so his quote was, he has changed the tempo of Blood Simple from glacial to slow. So, director's cut is the best you could do at that time.
There is an aspect which I've always found very interesting, and that's the fact that you are not a member of the ASC, the American Society of Cinematographers. If I'm not mistaken, you started shooting your own films and working as your own DP, so to speak, as of 1984, when you did 2010.
I was actually joined in the guild in 1983. They admitted me. Originally, they desperately didn't want it. It actually ended in a lawsuit against me and 20th Century Fox and the producer Frankie Blondes of Star Chamber, and they lost. So they put me in the union, and they hated me. There's not a film I made, some of which were from 2010 on, some of which were visually elaborate, some of which used technology that had not been used before. And I've never had an article about me or any film I've ever done in the ASC manual or anything like that. I became very friendly with Conrad Hall, and we would talk all the time. And one day Connie said to me, "Why don't you join the ASC?" I said, "They hate me. and he said, well, if Haskell, Wexler, and I sign your application, and Haskell was obviously an Oscar-winning cinematographer also. If we sign your application, would you join? I said, I'd be honored. So they signed my application, and I had to go down to this meeting in the ASC clubhouse, and they asked me questions, and I had to fill out something. And 2 days later, I got a printed letter that said, "You've been rejected. You can try again sometime." So I have it framed. And the lady at the framing place said to my wife, "You sure your husband wants this framed?" She said, "Yeah, he does." So I have it framed.
You've shot so many films which are elaborate and, let's say, chase scenes, let's say a running scared, for instance, which you did with Billy Crystal also. There are complicated shots in your movies as far as I'm concerned, let's say, or 2010 or Presidio or the Narrow March and Timecop and so many other films which you directed and shot. So
I was a precedent they didn't like. I believe I'm the first director to be admitted into the guild. There are a lot of guys who were cameramen who directed, uh, some very badly and some well. I think I'm the first director who was admitted into the union. I always wanted to shoot somebody else's movie. I had the chance to work for my son, who was directing the film, and it was just a joyous experience. To be with my son every day, uh, who to me has the talent I wish I had. And somebody said to me, why do you want to shoot somebody else's film?" I said, "Because I've always longed for the moment where I placed the camera in an odd place and somebody would look at me with that look of, why the hell are you putting the camera there?" And I could say, he wants it there.
and you're right, there is the, let's say, the flip side to the coin when a cinematographer becomes a director, for instance, Barry Sonnenfeld or Jan de Bond.
There are also examples of the other. I mean, William Fraker was not a success, and Gordy Willis was not a success.
What do you think is the biggest advantage of being your own DP? I mean, there must have been a reason for you to say, well, I won't work with, let's say, the likes of Bill Butler or Stephen Goldblatt again. I mean, Stephen shot Outland, and Bill Butler you worked with on Capricorn. So, did it kind of ensure a smoother day-to-day operation, or
When you do a film and you do the press junket, and all these people come in and do these interviews, and you do 70 interviews in a day, and they always ask the same questions. So why do you wear the same hats? Why do you wear so many hats? And my standard answer is, one, it's because I'm bald. And two, if you speak Japanese and you're fluent in Japanese and you're making a film in Tokyo, is it easier to make the film using an interpreter, or is it easier just to talk to everybody? I speak photography. You may like what I do or dislike what I do, except the charter for directing a movie is putting on screen what you see. That you see a movie, it's in your head, it's in every director's head, and you try to get as close to what you see as possible. And seeing also requires performance and that. Except you see the movie. I speak the language, so it's much easier for me. I can get closer to what I see, be it right or be it wrong. It's what I see.
and as I understand, you are also in particular interested in night photography, which is also, of course, evident when it comes to End of Days, for instance, or also Enemies Closer, which is a film which you released in 2013, your third collaboration with Jean-Claude Van Damme. And what makes night photography so interesting and fascinating to you?
I think visually every room, every field, every forest, every there's an event. The light in it in each thing is an event. Uh, Night is dramatic. Night is suspenseful by itself. Um, I photographed the way I drew, and the art that I studied and the art that I loved was chiaroscuro, and night lends itself to that. And if you're making something that's suspenseful, to me, night is the place to do it.
Thank you. And speaking of end of days, and I need to mention that film also in particular because I think it's one of your best and one of my personal favorites, also of the late 90s. And please correct me if I'm wrong, because I have heard that you didn't get to shoot the or release, you didn't get to release the version you wanted, and there was also a, let's say, a problem with the film's ending. Am I correct?
No, I released the film that I did want, and it was not the ending that was written. Arnold Schwarzenegger had the courage to do it. I mean, he'd never died in a movie before, and the original script he didn't die, and I shot both endings, and Universal and Arnold they were fine.
Isn't it a fact that I think James Cameron asked you to do the film because the first or the person they hired first didn't make it through the finish line? I think it was Marcus Nispel.
Yeah, well, he didn't make it to the beginning. Nothing had been shot, um, and I think Arnold was very displeased, and the producer, a very nice man named Armin Bernstein, is a very smart man. I guess they were very dissatisfied, and I was very friendly with Jim, and I was sitting in his office one day, and he said, "You're doing this movie." I said, "What do you mean I'm doing this movie?" He said, "You have to do this movie. Go meet Arnold." I said, "Why am I doing this movie?" He said, "Because you have to protect my franchise." That was his words. His franchise was Arnold Schwarzenegger at the time. Um, and I met with Arnold and adored him, and um, he was he hadn't made a film in a couple of years. He had a heart problem, and so this was his comeback. Uh, and he was very, you know, he was very open to some pretty significant changes into how he looked and being unshaven and being. There were lots of things during the film where I wanted to do something that he had another idea or he had an idea of something, all I said to him was, do the thing that I'm asking you to do, and then I'll do the thing you want to do, and then we'll look at it. Uh, and I don't know. I thought he was courageous. I don't know. It was a lot of fun.
If you ask a director or if you ask an actor, just do one take the way I see fit, and then we can talk about what you would want to do. How would you or how you would want to tweak it, or in terms of performance, in terms of the whole setup. I think this is a great way of approaching things because you may get, or let's just meet, because you may get a better version than you had imagined in the first place.
Absolutely. First place, I worship actors. I worship the courage. I work. I and you write a character and then you hand it to Sean Connery. You no longer own that character. Sean Connery owns the character, and Sean Connery knows more about Sean Connery. Arnold Schwarzenegger knows more about Arnold Schwarzenegger than you. And I find, I mean, Gene Hackman came up with little things, wearing a pair of glasses, just tiny little touches that he thought of that I looked at and just went, man, that's just fabulous. Uh, it's, as I said to somebody, it's a pretty good deal. People come up with all kinds of ideas and I get the credit.
Gene Hackman is a pleasure to watch. I mean, he's one of the greatest actors of all time, as far as I'm concerned.
Gene Hackman was one of those actors who, when you shoot it and you watch it, me, when I did, I would leave thinking, okay, I got it. And then I would look at the dailies and all the stuff in his eyes, all the little things around his corners of his lips, the tiny little subtle things that you could only see on a screen would come out. And he was, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant actors that ever graced the American screen. Uh, Actors come up with wonderful ideas. They always do. The worst days you have shooting a movie are the days you stumble back to your home or your hotel room having shot what you expected. It's it, it you have to create you have to create an atmosphere of surprise, and then you have to create a corridor so that that surprise is in context. Um,
Yeah.
you're working with Michael Douglas, you're working with Sean Connery, you're working with these guys. Man, they're so smart. Uh, and in the case of Michael, Billy Crystal's, it's just so lovely. There's a lot in Running Scared, a lot. That's just Billy. Just let him let him do.
Yeah. This must have been Billy Crystal's first big performance in a film ever. I mean, he had done stand up comedy and all that stuff prior to Running Scared, but it must have been his very first gig as a lead.
Actually, it was not his first gig as a lead. His first gig as a lead was a very unsuccessful movie called Rabbit Test that Joan Rivers had done. Uh, and he had done Saturday Night Live. And the original script of Running Scared was about two elderly New York policemen who retire. And I said, I want to make a film about two young cops in Chicago who don't retire. Um, Alan Ladd Jr. was the head of MGM at the time. He was scared because there were some very prominent um, actors who wanted to do Running Scared, the older version, and they were grown-ups. And I said, no, I really want. First, I threw Billy Crystal at him, and then I came back with Gregory Hines, uh, who was just to me a marvelous talent. He was just an actor I admired. Uh, I'd seen him in a movie, fairly obscure movie called Wolfen, and he was wonderful. Um, and the two of them really got along. There was just something between Billy and Gregory. They really got along, and it came out on the screen.
And Peter, many people would say that shooting comedies are a different beast and that this genre is more difficult than many other ones because of the pacing, because of the humor, because of, let's say, the storytelling process. I mean, you had done Running Scared and also Stay Tuned with John Ritter, which I think is a very creative film, actually. And what's your take on comedies and the structure and the pacing and how to get the best performance
Well,
out of people?
the old saying is dying is easy, comedy is hard. I think if something is funny, it's because something funny has happened on screen. When you shoot it funny, it's not going to work. To me, I think personally, you shoot it straight, and if it's funny, people will laugh. I don't know how to explain it better than that. You try to make it like just shoot it straight and let stuff happen. like music. They goes wah wah wah. It doesn't work.
And speaking of music and musical scores, I mean, you had or have worked with some of the finest composers. I mean, Jerry Goldsmith, Bruce Broughton, John Debney, John Barry. Who do you think, and I reckon that's a hard question, who do you think is the finest composer that you ever worked with?
I've worked with some remarkable composers, and they've made remarkable scores. I mean, John Debney, is really extraordinary. I have to say, Jerry Goldsmith's score for Capricorn One is certainly my favorite score. Except John Debney's score for the Relic is just amazing.
And you've worked with many different composers. I mean, if I may ask you, I mean, there are directors who focus on one composer and they zero in on somebody, and that's the person they go with for 20 years, 30 years, or for an entire career. Why have you opted to work with so many different talents, if I may ask?
The whole idea of scoring a film has changed so radically. When I started, we went to a composer's house and they would hammer out something on the piano, and you kind of go, oh, and then you show up and there's a 100-piece orchestra and they're playing stuff, and now you make a film, with John Debney, and John will make a synthesized sketch of what's going to be, and you hear the violins and you hear the horn, and you can say to him, no, don't put strings here or put bass strings here, and it's exactly what you're going to get. So I kind of settled on John, and I would have made more films with John, except some of the films I made were less expensive and he couldn't afford John. I also worked with a wonderful guy named David Arnold, who's written some fabulous music.
The Musketeer.
Did a terrific job with me. The Musketeer was actually one of the saddest experiences I ever had. I loved making the film. I loved the score. I loved the film. I loved the actors. I got to work with my crush, Catherine Deneuve, who is even more beautiful in life than she is on screen, and a wonderful actress. The film had great previews, terrific reviews. They asked me to open the Deauville Film Festival. My wife and I went to Deauville, and they applauded the film, and I got emails and stuff from New York. Film opens in America, #1 film in the country, big hit. And I'm sitting in Deauville eating mussels and drinking beer and feeling just fabulous. And that Sunday or Monday, we came back to my big hit movie and my wonderful reception overseas, and it was 9/11. And that was it. Movies were closed and the film was gone. It was a film of which I'm proud, and it was a film which I got a chance to work with an amazing man named Yen Zhang, who was just, I mean, there's some stuff in that film that's pretty good in terms of the set pieces. Some of it's, and it's Yen, and I did have this idea of making the Three Musketeers and making it Asian, making it Chinese in terms of its action. And I don't think that had ever been done. And it seemed to work. And then 9/11 happened and boom, it was over.
The film was wonderful and the score was wonderful. And David Arnold is a fantastic talent. I'm so sorry that he doesn't get to work more frequently today.
The one that I've never worked with because I never had the opportunity to, who I wish I would love to have worked with, who I just worship, is Carter Burwell. Music can enhance anything in a movie except reality. When it's used, when it's used to do something, it can enhance suspense, it can enhance romance. It can't make anything funny. Funny music doesn't work to me. When people use music as a kind of wall-to-wall thing over dialogue and things like that, with just musicians sawing away, I just I don't respond to it.
It's such an important part of the filmmaking process, finding the right notes, finding the right composer, the right collaborator. It doesn't have to be complex music. To me, it doesn't matter if the music is complex or if it's simple. It needs to work. It needs to conjure up and stir up emotion.
I came to a conclusion that when you have especially an orchestral score, when you have a score and you have a track for a scene, and by itself it sounds great, it's too much. And when you just listen to some of this tracks from wonderful movies, they're sparer than you think, and then they're big when they're supposed to be big. Very few directors use silence as well as Sidney Lumet, and silence is sometimes one of the greatest sounds ever.
I've always been fascinated with movies. I love the whole industry and movies and music. The industry never ceases to amaze me, especially also when it comes to the films which you shot and directed in the 80s. And Outland, which I tried to rewatch as many of your movies as possible, and I almost made it through the finish line except for two. I love Outland, and I also love what Jerry Goldsmith did with the score. And Sean Connery, what an amazing presence in that film. You worked with him twice on Presidio and also on Outland. And there are a couple of actors that you worked with that are no longer with us. Sean Connery, Tom Sizemore, and also Roy Scheider. What are your memories of those great actors and your collaboration with them? Maybe you could share one or two stories about these gentlemen.
Well, Sean was the biggest movie star I ever encountered. I mean, Sean Connery would walk into a room, and everybody would turn around and stare at him. There was something about the eyebrow going up, and that his size and his he was just bigger than life. He was that way in person, and he was that way on screen. And he was a wonderful actor. He was a very underrated actor in many instances. He was a big star, made a ton of money, except you go see movies like The Hill, The Man Who Would Be King, where you see Sean being absolutely without any vanity whatsoever. Michael, I can't talk about making films without talking about Michael Douglas, who just one of the smartest and best people I ever met. Roy Scheider was a lovely guy, a terrific guy, and a guy who studied what he was doing. And I never worked with anybody who wasn't prepared. I never, when I was starting out and pretty young, I made a film with Natalie Wood. We were shooting, and it was late in one day, and I had laid, I don't know how many hundreds of feet of dolly track for this very long shot. And the crew was getting tired, and it was hot, and we were shooting in the Harold Lloyd estate, which is not air conditioned, and people were getting cranky. And it came time for Natalie. This is after a very elaborate setup of light and track. And she came out, and I used to call her Nat. I said, Nat, you start here and you walk all the way to here, and then you turn around and say your line. And she said, what's my motivation for saying my line there? And the whole crew kind of went, oh my God. And I said, well, that's all the track we have. If you keep on walking, you're out of the shot. And she turned to me and she said, I think I feel it. Uh, I mean, I worked with wonderful people. I just, Natalie was one of the sweetest, greatest ladies I ever met. Michael Caine was as charming and amusing a man as I ever met in my life. Hackman is an interesting guy. Gene Hackman kind of had this blue collar quality about him. He was he is extremely erudite, a very talented artist who would sketch all the time in between takes, unbelievably well read, and had the kind of instinct that I've almost never seen in terms of what to do and what not to do. I remember he taught me this wonderful lesson where a day player would come on and we'd rehearse, and he'd turn to me and he'd say, I don't like her, she doesn't listen. Or I like her, she listens. And I suddenly realized what many people before me had realized long before, that acting is listening. And if you look at the eyes of an actor when somebody else is speaking, you can tell if they're in it or if they're not. And Hackman personified it.
And Michael Douglas, I mean, he's one of my favorite actors too. I mean, you worked with him twice at the Star Chamber, which also features Hal Holbrook, another very talented actor. And the Star Chamber is a very interesting movie because it deals with the law and, let's say, the at times ridiculous nature of the law.
Every case in that film, every incident in that film was really happened. There was no fake case. I even remember the name of the garbage runner. It was the People versus Krivda. Really happened. I spent a lot of time with the judge in court, very nice man named David Rothman, who was a Superior Court judge in Los Angeles. The original script was a vigilante script. And I said to the head of Fox, to Sherry Lansing, I said, I want to make a film that's against vigilantism. And she said, so do I. And I said, okay. Then so I rewrote it. And the trick was to seduce the audience into being vigilantes and then pull the rug out from under them so that their spirit of being a vigilante was wrong. It was tricky. I hope I did it. I don't know.
And Peter, are you a big proponent of the rehearsal process? Or let's say I've heard that many directors like to rehearse many takes and then just opt for one or two takes when the rehearsal part is over. How do you like to work? What do you find the most attractive solution?
Sidney Lumet rehearses for weeks before he shoots. He did, and he actually marked out on the floor camera moves, and he knew exactly what he was going to do beforehand. And many actors love rehearsal. I've always felt totally inadequate because so many of the things I did involved the kind of physicality. So I don't know how you rehearse driving in a car. I don't know how you rehearse a lot of these scenes. So I didn't really rehearse much, just a week before the actors come on, the lead actors come on, and you kind of get to know each other, and you go to lunch, and then you read a couple of scenes, and that's all I could do. And I always felt like a complete boob. And then I saw this interview with Sidney Pollack on Inside the Actors Studio, and he was asked his rehearsal process, and he said, "I don't know how to rehearse. I just can't do it." So I just felt so. I went, "Oh, thank God!" Sidney Pollack was just, in my opinion, one of the finest directors around. I also believe actors shouldn't act to light. Light should perform to the actors. So my method had always been, here's the set. Let's read the scene and do the scene and see where you go, see where you're comfortable. And after doing that a couple of times, all right, I'm going to get up when I say this. And they normally do it for good reasons. And then I light the set. All right, we need some light here. We need some light here. And then I do a take or two until, I don't know, there's something magical. If you're doing a complicated shot, and I think people who've been involved in the process will agree, somehow or other, actors lead the camera. I don't know why, I don't know how, except when the take is good and when they're doing it right, the operator is like so involved in what they're doing that it just works. And when they're not right there, the camera doesn't work. I shoot a couple of takes until I have what I think is right. And then I say to the actors, is there anything you want to do? And I shoot until the actor says, okay, I got it. Now, some actors don't like to do a lot, and some actors like to do a lot. Connery didn't like to do a lot. Hackman didn't like to do a lot. Scheider liked to do a lot. Ann Archer liked to do a lot, and Gene did not like to do a lot. So it was difficult sometimes because he would get a little cranky. I don't know. Whatever makes the acting process easier for them, whenever they can feel that your hands are strong enough, they can jump out of a window and they know you're going to grab their ankles. Once they feel that, they'll just do things and surprise you. And those are the great moments.
Great, thank you. And I would like to at least briefly talk about Jean-Claude Van Damme and the films you made with him. Timecop, Sudden Death, and also Enemies Closer. And I think to this day, Timecop is the highest grossing Jean-Claude Van Damme movie ever. And I think it's also one of the best films that he's ever starred in. My favorite Van Damme movies are probably Hard Targets and Timecop. Many people actually said that Van Damme gave his best or some of his best acting performances for you. What do you think made that possible? Was it a certain comfort level? Was it how you directed him? How you actually managed to, let's say, reach out and grab his attention?
Jean-Claude wanted me to do the movie. I did not know much about Jean-Claude Van Damme. I hadn't seen a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. The producer was a guy I wound up working with a lot named Moshe Diamond, who I adore. And I think Jean-Claude wanted to make a film with a. He wanted me for whatever reasons he wanted me. So he just had to listen. And Moshe Diamant was an enormous help. I initially didn't really want to do the film. I hadn't read it. And my son turned to me and said, Andy Davis made the best Steven Seagal movie. Why don't you make the best Van Damme movie? And then I read the script, which I thought was really clever. I thought it was a wonderful idea. Again, with the help of the producer, the only fight I had on that movie was I thought there should be a scene in the beginning that would set the whole thing off. A scene in the Old West where a guy comes in and shoots with this. That had not been in the script, and I wanted to shoot it. And the studio was headed by Larry Gordon at the time. It was his company, and he said, "No, you don't need the scene, and we don't." And I said, "Well, I think we do." And he said, "Well, let's wait." And halfway through the film, I got the go ahead to shoot the scene. And there's a long scene in the Capitol with a senator and all that stuff that I thought made things make sense, that the rest of the movie made sense. And Van Damme was just so eager. He was just he was he was he just wanted to do good. He wanted to do a good film. Uh, and Moshe Diamant, just said to me, you got to have him do a split. You got to have him you have to do these 4 or 5 things. And he said, if you can do all those, and then Moshe came up with a terrific little thing in the script about him learning that his wife is pregnant. Um, so I don't know, we just had a terrific time. And then the final scene, which takes place on the roof of this house, it's suddenly frozen Vancouver. And Moshe said, you can build the roof inside and we can shoot it inside in the rain. I'm the only guy who went to Vancouver and made rain. It's kind of like going to Alaska and bringing ice. And when a movie's good, more often than not, like everything is good. Just the effects are good, the stunts are good, the wardrobe is good, the music is good. Very few. It's just that somehow or other things coalesce in a movie, and things work.
Yeah.
When I did Running Scared, I wanted Billy Crystal and Gregory Hines. I wanted songs, and my dear friend Dick Rudolph, who I knew and loved for years, worked on the film he supervised the music, and he said, you got to use this guy Rod Temperton. Rod Temperton had written little ditties like Thriller and stuff like that for Michael Jackson. And Rod wound up writing these songs. And I remember there's this one song that Michael McDonald sang. And Dick played it for me. And I went, nah, I don't like that song. And Dick said, it's good. It's going to be in the movie. I said, no, I don't think I'm going to use it. And he finally said, listen, dickhead, it's going to be in the movie. So I put it in, and it's, of course, the most successful piece of music I was ever involved in. And if I had been left to my own devices, it probably wouldn't have been in there.
And music-wise, I completely, of course, also forgot to mention Mark Isham, who scored Timecop. Yeah, really good score. Allowed the main title, and also speaking of main titles, what John Debney wrote for The End of Days, I thought that was terrific.
My son was talking to me about Outland, and the main title music of just the titles. Jerry Goldsmith had written something I didn't like. And on the mixing stage, I went, it's not going to work. So I took out the piece that Jerry had written, and I got a cymbal on the stage, and I took what's called a mallet, which is a soft-headed thing that timpanists use, and I hit the cymbal really hard. I recorded it at high speed and played it backwards, and that's the main title of music. It's just a cymbal being hit high speed, played backwards.
So far, we haven't really spoken about 2010. 2010 is a very special film, actually. And as I understand, you only opted to do it, or you only would opt to do it in case you received Stanley Kubrick's approval. Is that right?
Absolutely. I knew going in, William Goldman said, listen, we've all read Shakespeare, so we start out knowing we're second rate. I knew if I made 2010, I was going to be compared to Kubrick, and you can't compare me to Kubrick. It's like comparing a sparrow to a bald eagle. So I would, when MGM asked me to do the movie, I said I need Arthur Clarke's approval, and I need Stanley Kubrick's approval. And then I read the book, and the book didn't have any of the politics, and I wanted to put the politics in. I wanted to put Russians and Americans getting along and working together while their countries were practically on the brink of war. I thought that would put everything good. Arthur liked that idea very much. So it was then Kubrick and I felt I had to make a movie that was so unlike 2001 that you couldn't compare me to Kubrick, because I mean he's the best and I'm not. So I had to make something that was just completely different in tone and in look and in pace and everything. And I at first had to get his approval. Well, it turns out he's this actually very sweet guy. But however, we arranged a phone call, and my assistant buzzed me on the intercom and said, "It's Mr. Kubrick on the phone." And I stood up and spoke to him standing up the whole time. And I said hello. And the first thing he said was, "In Outland, how'd you make that shot? And what lens were you using? And how many thought?" And suddenly we were just talking about, he was just pumping me about how I did certain things, because he was a photographer actually, who was not allowed in the union by the British unions. He was a wonderful still photographer, and he made his own lenses for Barry Lyndon that were 0.9 lenses. They needed a computer grid to keep focus. So I spoke to him, and he was supportive and just really dear, and just said, "Don't be afraid. Go make your movie and make it yours." I hung up. I spoke to him for about 2.5 hours, 3 hours. And then my assistant came in and said, "What was it like?" I said, "I just talked to Stanley Kubrick for almost 3 hours. I told him everything. He told me nothing." And later on, I was with Arthur Clarke, who was very involved in the film, was even an extra in the film. And I said, "Arthur, tell me, what was it like when you first met Stanley?" He said, "Well, we sat on a park bench for like 3 hours, and I told him everything and he told me nothing." So that was my experience. And then during the filming, when I would talk to him and after the film, he was only supportive and nice. Very sweet, very disarming, with a New York accent.
What's your favorite Kubrick movie?
Paths of Glory,
Okay.
Dr. Strangelove, and Lolita.
I would go with Shining and Clockwork Orange, I believe. Yeah.
Clockwork Orange put in there too. Yeah. You can't think of a bad movie that Stanley Kubrick made. They don't make bad movies. They sometimes make movies that don't resonate with you, or they don't resonate with an audience as well. They're not bad movies. Steven Spielberg can't make a bad movie. Alfonso Cuarón can't make a bad movie. Uh, they're incapable of it. They just, maybe they're telling a story that you're not interested in.
And
I mean, I've seen films made by Martin Scorsese that I haven't been crazy about. On the other hand, he made Goodfellas. He made Raging Bull. I mean, he made two of the greatest films anybody's ever seen, and he keeps on going at it. He keeps on pushing it. He keeps on. He's inquisitive. You know, he's Martin Scorsese. He deserves the acclaim he got.
yeah, he's one of the best filmmakers ever. I mean,
Without
I
question.
I love Casino, for instance. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. I would even rate Casino higher than Goodfellas. Many people say it's the other way around.
I think Goodfellas is the film.
Okay. It's a great film, yeah.
There are films that I consider to be perfect. You know, like the perfect films. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid to me is a perfect movie. The Godfather is a perfect movie. Goodfellas to me is a perfect movie. E.T. to me is a perfect movie. You couldn't change a thing.
Peter, one last thing about 2010. That's actually one of the first, if not the first film to use a CGI shot.
Yeah, yeah. The Jupiter, all the shots of Jupiter. I had a man named Richard Terrell from JPL here in Pasadena work with me, and we got every cloud formation on Jupiter moving in the direction that it moves. Uh, and in every shot of 2010, Jupiter is CGI. There was a guy named John Whitney who had a Cray computer, which was the most powerful computer in the public sector. And it looked like something out of Star Trek. It was a series of tufted towers. It took him 30 seconds a frame to put it out. Yeah, I'm kind of proud that, little known, except that's the first, if not one of the first movies to ever use CGI.
Peter, if we still have a couple of minutes left, I would like to ask you about your advice for young filmmakers. And I know that it has become, or it has been described as incredibly difficult to get films financed, to get films off the ground. Certain directors, or many directors, seem to struggle these days because they take, or their projects take a backseat to gigantic Marvel productions and so on. What would you tell students of film or young up and coming directors? What's essential in this business? And
well, the two things, because it's no different than, well, it's actually better now than when I came in. First place, just because you want to direct doesn't mean you should direct. Wanting to do something doesn't qualify you to do it. So very few people are gifted. The biggest advice I could give to anybody who wants to make a film is tell the goddamn story. Don't call attention to yourself. Fall in love with the story. Two, there is more need for stories and film with all these streaming platforms than there ever was with 3 broadcast networks and 4 or 5 studios. In the 1930s, they made something like 800 movies. In 1971, the total output was about 100 movies. And there were 3 broadcast networks, and most of them were doing crap. Now you look at, I keep it. Look what Ben Stiller did with the Prison Break film. Look what Ben Stiller did with his next thing. There's this great arena for telling stories, not worrying about PG ratings, more than ever before. So I think there's more opportunity now than there was 40 years ago.
do you wish to comment on Sound of Thunder? Or the Sound of Thunder, as I understand, was a film, or is a film, which was plagued by production issues, by a company which went bankrupt, and that the special effects couldn't be finished on time and on budget. So, am I on the right track?
Well, it was made by a company that ran out of money, and I had a $12 million visual effects budget that was cut to $2 million. There was actual full year to wait for that money to come in, where we just sat and looked at screens and stuff. So going in, it was going to be a certain level of film, and coming out, it was another level. Everybody except a chosen few experienced that.
Peter, what's actually next for you?
I don't know. I'm waiting to fall in love with an idea, and I've yet to fall in love with it. There are people who love writing. I've been paying my rent as a writer, and since I'm 20 years old, I hate writing. I don't think there's any good part for me. Sitting around trying to come up with an idea is awfully painful. Actually coming up with an idea is horrible, because then you have to write it. Writing is painful because it's so lonely and so solitary. Getting done writing is painful because then people are going to read it and tell you what's wrong with it. So when I see guys like the Tarantinos of the world who just seem to love every part of it, I'm envious. He's also so inventive. He's inventive in his writing. He's inventive in his filmmaking.
Peter, actually, there's one special actor whom I love, which we didn't really talk about, and it's Harrison Ford. I mean,
Yeah.
You directed him when you did Hanover Street. I mean, he's one of those charismatic actors.
Because Harrison has that thing where his emotions are an eighth of an inch from the surface of his skin. You always know what he's feeling. He's one of the great sufferers of the world. Uh, he's also devilishly funny. He's people don't realize how funny he actually is. I just I think I didn't serve him well by making a film that didn't make money. Except I knew he was going to be a star.
Yeah, I mean, by that point, of course, Star Wars had been huge, but of
Yeah.
course, Harrison Ford wasn't the big star that which he became, 1 or 2 years later. And I think he has actually been in some of the best pictures of the 80s and 90s. I mean, The Fugitive, for instance, Andrew Davis, whom you mentioned. In terms of Steven Seagal, that was Under Siege because you mentioned.
Yeah, and because of Under Siege, Harrison wanted him to do The Fugitive. Um, I mean, Andrew showed medal in making this Steven Seagal movie that was actually terrific. Uh, and Seagal had not been famous for making terrific films before that. I just, Harrison had made Hanover Street. He made a film, The Frisco Kid, and he made another film, none of which was successful. Um, and then it was Indiana Jones that made him. Um, it was he was not just Han Solo. Now he was Indy, and when he was Indy, he was everybody went, this is just the biggest guy, and he deserved it. He deserved it because he's a terrific guy.
He was a bankable star. I mean, Indiana Jones, obviously. I mean, so many great pictures. Presumed Innocent. So many great pictures. So
You talk about good filmmakers. Alan Pakula belongs up there.
yeah,
Again, you watch All the President's Men, or you watch Presumed Innocent, and you see a guy who's in love with telling a story.
there are so many films which need to be discovered also by a young audience. Talk about the Billy Friedkins and the young Ridley Scotts and so many others. The Coppolas.
Talk about William Wyler and talk about people like that. Maybe it's because I was an art student. When you're an art student, you study the great painters, you study the Renaissance, you study the French Impressionists, you study the realists. When you learn how to play an instrument, by and large, you learn about Bach and Beethoven before you learn about Ice-T. And somehow or other with movies, people don't look at the masters as much as they should, because these guys we're talking about are the Michelangelos and the Caravaggios. These guys are the Rembrandts of their medium.
Yeah, true.
I don't know how you can fall in love with a medium and not want to know the greats. Again, when you're an art student, one of the things all art students do is sit in museums and copy paintings. That's what you do. You look at great paintings, either in books or in museums. You'd see people in sketch pads in museums all the time. I don't know how you can learn to play piano and not listen to Chopin. I just don't know how you do that. I wasn't around when Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and those guys were making movies, except and Ernst Lubitsch and William Wyler. I don't know how you could love movies and not see these films, not see Citizen Kane and Casablanca and The Third Man. I mean, I mentioned Carol Reed to people, and they don't. I don't know who Carol Reed was. And I go, I don't know how you can love movies and not know who Carol Reed was.
Allow me one last question. And do you think that certain executives or producers or studio heads should be willing to take more risks?
The theatrical business suffered a crippling blow with COVID and the explosion of streaming. I think it's maybe inching its way back. Um, but I think their job is not to nurture film talent. Their job is not to discover people. Their job is to make some money. And again, there's no business like it's a business. And if you don't if some kid graduates film school and thinks that he or she is owed a chance, they're fools. They have to make a set of circumstances. The only reason why anybody lets you direct is because they had to. They wanted a piece of material that you controlled, or an actor wanted you or was willing for you, and the actor was big. Um, Nobody owes anybody anything. You have to earn it.
That's interesting because I think it was Don Simpson who also once said something along the lines of, it's not our obligation to make art or to make a great movie, it's our obligation to make money.
That's what movie studios are about. Uh, there was a group of executives. Again, I mentioned John Calley, I mentioned Alan Ladd, I mentioned Sherry Lansing, who loved movies. And also, there was a time when movies were the business of movie companies and nothing else. Uh, Now, movie companies are divisions of very large companies. The theatrical movie business is a part of what they do. It's not what they do. And so as a result, if money's not coming in, they don't want it.
Peter, I would like to thank you so very much for taking so much time out of your schedule. I really appreciate that. And I had a great time talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
I'm extremely flattered, and of course I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to chatting again down the road, provided that you have the time. And thank you very much. That conversation really meant a lot to me. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a good day.
Be good.
Bye.